Have you ever noticed? The harder we try to hold on, the faster things seem to slip away. It's strange, isn't it? We spend our lives chasing stability, clinging to people, titles, routines, hoping they'll make us feel safe, only to find that everything is already changing. But what if the problem isn't the change? What if the problem is how tightly we hold on? Today, we'll explore a quiet truth the Buddha taught, not through force, but through presence. A way of walking through life that doesn't resist the river, but learns how to float. And somewhere along the way, I'll share a story about a monk who bowed to the ashes of everything he loved. It just might change the way you see your own letting go. So if your heart's been tired lately, if you've been gripping too hard, come sit with me. This isn't just a video, it's a moment of stillness. If you feel something stir in you, gently tap subscribe. Let's walk this path together. I used to believe that if I just worked hard enough, planned carefully enough, and kept my heart guarded, life would cooperate with me. That the universe would reward effort with ease, loyalty with love, and discipline with stability. But then one day, all of that collapsed. It didn't come like a storm I could see coming in the distance. It was more like a quiet undoing, like the slow leak of air from a tire you didn't even realize had a hole. One day you're driving full speed, and the next, you're stranded on the side of the road with no idea how you got there. Maybe you've had a moment like that. Maybe it's happening right now. For me, it was the end of a relationship I thought would last forever, combined with a sudden health scare and the slow disappearance of a creative passion I once loved like a limb. I remember waking up in the middle of the night, staring at the ceiling in the dark, whispering, "Why me?" That question echoed in my chest like a bell without an answer. But what if the question wasn't why me? What if it was, what is this moment trying to show me? You see, Buddhism doesn't try to wrap pain up in pretty words or pretend it doesn't exist. Quite the opposite. The very first teaching of the Buddha is that life contains dukkha, a Pali word that's often translated as suffering, but is really more layered than that. It's not just deep grief or heartbreak. It's also the low-grade discomfort, the dissatisfaction that creeps into even the most beautiful moments, the birthday party that feels just a little too quiet, the achievement that doesn't fill you the way you thought it would. Dukkha is that quiet ache under the surface of things. But it's not a verdict. It's an invitation. The Buddha didn't stop with saying that life contains suffering. He went on to teach that this suffering has a cause, and because it has a cause, it can also have an end. And the end begins not with escape, but with presence. It's strange, isn't it, that the way out is actually the way in. I remember once walking through a park during that time of my life when everything felt like it was falling apart. The trees were tall and solemn, their roots coiling under the earth like ancient veins. A breeze rustled the leaves in a hush that felt almost sacred. I sat down on a bench and just let myself be, not fixing, not fighting, just breathing. That was the first time I heard it, not with my ears, but with some deeper sense inside of me. A whisper, a knowing. This moment, even this, belongs. I didn't understand it fully then, but it was the beginning. Later that month, I came across a Zen story about a monk and a teacup. You might have heard it. A young student accidentally breaks his master's favorite cup. Panicked, he runs to confess, holding the broken pieces in trembling hands. The master looks at him, smiles gently, and says, "The cup was already broken." First, I didn't get it. How could he say that? It wasn't broken before. But slowly, it began to make sense. The master wasn't being dismissive. He was pointing to the truth of impermanence, anicca, that everything, from our bodies to our relationships to our joy and our pain, is in constant motion. Nothing stays the same. Nothing can. When we love something or someone, we unconsciously assume it will always be there. But things are already changing, already moving toward a new shape. The teacup, no matter how beautiful, was always going to break one day, just like we all are, just like everything we try to hold still. And in that awareness, strange as it sounds, there's peace. Because if we know something is already broken, already passing, then we can love it more deeply while it's here. We can be fully present for it without clinging, without grasping, without that desperate attempt to freeze the moment like a photograph. I began to look around my life with new eyes. That friendship I was mourning, it had been fading long before the final goodbye. That job I lost, I had stopped growing there years ago. Even the version of myself I was grieving, the driven, always in control persona, had been quietly asking to be let go. The truth was, the cup had already been broken. And maybe, just maybe, the breaking wasn't the tragedy. Maybe it was the beginning of something new. One evening, I came across another story, this one less philosophical, more earthy. A farmer planted bamboo. Day after day, he watered the soil, tended it, nourished it, but nothing came up. Not in the first year, not in the second, or third, or fourth. People laughed at him, called him foolish, said he was wasting time on empty dirt. But in the fifth year, something extraordinary happened. The bamboo shot up more than 80 feet in just 6 weeks. All that time, it had been growing, not upward, but downward. Beneath the surface, it had been weaving a root system strong enough to support what was coming. Without those years of invisible work, it never could have grown so tall. I don't know about you, but that story hit me hard, because when we suffer, it often feels like we're stuck, like nothing is moving, like we're being buried, not planted. But what if that's just what it looks like from the surface? What if your grief is growing roots? What if the silence is preparing you for a different kind of strength? And what if the slow seasons, the empty seasons, are not dead time, but sacred time? The monk with the broken cup, the farmer with the hidden roots, they're not just characters in stories. They're mirrors, reflections of what's possible when we stop resisting the storm and start listening to what it's trying to say. Buddhist practice doesn't offer us shortcuts, but it offers us something much more powerful. A shift in how we meet the moment. Instead of running from pain, we're invited to sit with it. Instead of clinging to what's passing, we're taught to open our hands. Instead of asking, why me? We learn to ask, what is this moment trying to teach me? And the answer often comes, not in words, but in stillness. In the warm taste of tea in a cracked cup. In the quiet breath between sobs. In the way the moon still rises, even when no one's watching. Sometimes the answer is simply this. This too is part of the path. Even now, when storms return, and they do, I try to meet them differently. I light a candle. Isit. I breathe. I remember the cup. I remember the roots. I remember that everything is already changing. And somehow that makes it okay. Because maybe, just maybe, pain isn't punishment. It's preparation. Not an ending, but a doorway. And on the other side, not certainty, not control, but peace. A peace that doesn't depend on circumstances. A peace that comes from learning how to let go. And learning, finally, how to stay. The thread you cannot see. I used to think karma was cosmic punishment. You know, like the universe keeping some invisible scorecard. You trip over a shoelace and stub your toe? Must have been something you did in a past life. You lose your job, get cheated on, get sick? Karma, people say, with a shrug and a sigh. But the more I walked along the Buddhist path, the more I began to realize that isn't what karma means at all. It's not some mysterious force out to get you. It's not revenge dressed in robes. Karma is gentler than that, quieter, but far more powerful. It begins with a thought, not even a word, not even an action, just a whisper inside your mind, a ripple that spreads, slowly, endlessly, becoming a word, becoming a choice, becoming a life. It's strange to think about, but every moment, we're weaving something, like a spider spinning silk, not even fully aware of the web we're building. Each thought we nurture, each word we choose, each step we take, it all leaves a thread, and together those threads create the shape of our days. Sometimes I wonder how many invisible threads I've spun in a single afternoon. That time I snapped at someone because I was tired, that thread didn't just disappear. It lingered in their heart. That time I offered a stranger a smile at the market when I saw their shoulders slumped, that thread might have lightened their entire day. Karma isn't just about what comes back to us. It's about what flows through us. What we plant, we eventually walk through. And sometimes we're walking through fields we planted years ago, or lifetimes ago. I remember hearing a story when I was a teenager, back when I didn't believe in much of anything. There was an old man in a village. He had a beautiful horse, strong, swift, admired by all. One day, the horse ran away. The villagers came and said, "Oh no, what bad luck." But the old man just shrugged and said, "Good luck, bad luck, who knows?" A few days later, the horse returned, bringing with it a wild mare. Now the villagers said, "Oh wow, what good luck." Again, the old man replied, "Good luck, bad luck, who knows?" Later that week, the man's son tried to tame the wild horse and broke his leg. "Such terrible luck," the neighbors whispered. And still the old man said, "Good luck, bad luck, who knows?" Then a war broke out. Soldiers came to the village to draft all the able-bodied young men. But they left the old man's son alone because of his injury. And the villagers once again said, "Well, you get the idea." That story sat in me like a seed. And it wasn't until years later, after my own bad luck, that it bloomed. Divorce, illness, a friendship ending without closure. Each one felt like a door slamming shut. But later, sometimes years later, I saw what they made possible. The space they cleared, the strength they awakened, the people they brought into my life who wouldn't have arrived otherwise. I began to understand something deep and still and quiet. Karma is not reward or punishment. It is reflection. It mirrors back to us the energy we carry, the seeds we plant, the truths we ignore, the intentions we hold in our hearts. One morning, I watched a single raindrop fall into a pond. The surface trembled for just a second, then ripples spread outward in perfect circles. So simple, so subtle, so complete. Our lives are like that pond. Every word, every act of kindness, cruelty, distraction, compassion, creates waves that touch shores we'll never even see. The hard part is, we don't always see the timeline. Sometimes the seed we plant doesn't bloom for 10 years. Sometimes it blooms in someone else. I once had a student who used to come to my meditation workshops. He was restless, skeptical, always checking the clock. After a few months, he stopped coming. I figured he'd moved on. Years passed. Then one day I got a message from him. He said his father had passed away, and in his grief, the only thing that helped was remembering what we'd practiced. Sitting still, breathing through discomfort, letting go. He wrote, "I didn't get it back then, but now I do. You planted something in me that took a while to bloom." I sat with that message for a long time, letting it warm my chest like sunlight through a temple window. We never really know what seeds we're planting, or when they'll rise, or how, but we plant anyway. We plant with our presence, with our attention, with the way we show up even when nobody's watching. And sometimes we plant with our silence. There's this space between action and reaction, a small breath, a pause. That's where karma is forged. In that breath, we get to choose. Do I lash out? Do I listen? Do I cling? Do I release? The more we cultivate that space, the more we shift from reaction to response. And that shift changes everything. Even neuroscience confirms what Buddhism has taught for centuries. Our brains aren't fixed, they're shaped by what we practice. If you practice anger, your anger grows strong. If you practice patience, that grows strong too. Karma isn't just some spiritual concept floating in the sky. It's also biology. It's also habit. It's what you feed, what you water, what you repeat. One evening, I was walking through a quiet garden. The sky had just begun to blush with evening light. A spider had spun a web between two low-hanging branches. And there it was, delicate, gleaming, fragile, but strong enough to hold 1,000 dewdrops. That's karma. That's life. A web of moments, choices, patterns. Sometimes you don't even see it until the light hits it just right. Until something painful shows you the pattern you've been spinning. But when you do see it, you get to change the thread. And there is so much hope in that. You're not being punished. You're being shown. Not because the universe is cruel, but because it's kind enough to reflect you to yourself, to give you another chance, to offer a deeper seeing. The work isn't easy, but it's beautiful, because once you start paying attention, you begin to live differently. You pause before you speak. You feel the texture of your own thoughts. You notice when your shoulders are tense and choose to soften instead. You smile, not out of obligation, but because something inside you is quietly joyful. And maybe, just maybe, you begin to understand that your life is not happening to you. It's being woven through you, thread by thread, choice by choice, breath by breath. And that's what karma really is. A gentle reminder that you're always creating, even now, even here. And if everything you do ripples outward, then maybe today is a good day to begin again. The beauty of what doesn't stay. I used to think that holding on was strength, that the tighter I gripped something, a dream, a person, a version of myself, the more likely I could keep it from slipping away. Felt noble even to fight change, to say, no, not yet, to believe that if I tried hard enough, I could keep everything exactly as it was. But life, as it turns out, isn't clay in our hands. It's water, and the more you try to squeeze it, the faster it slips through your fingers. The first time I really felt that truth was when I lost someone I loved. Not suddenly, not tragically, just slowly, like a soft fade. We grew apart, and though nothing dramatic happened, the distance between us became wider than words could reach. For months, I clung to hope like a vine curling around a broken post. I replayed conversations in my head, checked my phone too often, told myself, if I just do this, maybe they'll come back. But they didn't. And the more I resisted that truth, the more I suffered. I once read something that stopped me cold. It said, let go or be dragged. At first, I smiled at the simplicity. But then I realized I was dragging myself through every memory, every what if, every fragment of a connection that had already unraveled. That's when the word impermanence came into my life like a quiet teacher. In Buddhism, impermanence isn't just a fact. It's a doorway. Anicca, the word in Pali, means that nothing lasts. Not sorrow, not joy, not the cherry blossoms that bloom like confetti for just a few days each year. Not the pain in your chest when someone you love walks away. Not the version of yourself you once needed, but no longer recognize. I remember once sitting under a Bodhi tree on a retreat watching leaves fall. It wasn't windy. There wasn't a storm. They just let go. No struggle. No ceremony. One by one, they floated down like small, quiet blessings. I thought, how do they know when it's time? And the answer came not in words, but in stillness. They let go when it's their time to fall. They trust the process. They don't cling to the branch. They don't scream into the wind. They surrender, not because they're weak, but because they understand something I was still learning. That everything belongs to change. Even love, even loss, even us. There's an old teaching by Ajahn Chah, a beloved Thai forest monk. He would hold up a glass and say, I see this glass as already broken. At first, that sounds a little dark, doesn't it? But it's not. He goes on to say, because I see it as already broken, I can truly appreciate it. When I drink from it, I enjoy it fully. When it slips from my hand and shatters, I say, of course. That is surrender, not despair, not detachment, but a deeper, wiser love. The kind of love that knows everything is on loan. And because it's temporary, it's more precious, not less. There's a story I heard from a monk I met in Chiang Mai. He told me about the temple where he was ordained, how it had stood for over 300 years. One day, lightning struck during a thunderstorm, and the entire wooden temple caught fire. He watched it burn. His home, his sacred place of study, the altar where he first bowed in tears after taking his vows. And when the flames died down, he bowed again, this time to the ashes. I asked him why. He said, because even in its ending, it was still a teacher. That image stayed with me, a monk bowing to what had burned. There's something so humbling about that, so heartbreakingly beautiful. We don't just bow to what nourishes us. We bow to what ends. We bow to what leaves, to what hurts, because all of it, every chapter, every shift, every collapse, is part of the path. And it is only when we bow to it instead of bracing against it that we begin to know peace. I once let go of a dream that had defined me for a decade. At first, it felt like a death. Who am I without this? What will people think? Am I failing? But slowly, in the space that opened up, something else grew. Quiet joy, a deeper honesty, a new dream, gentler, truer. One that didn't need to impress anyone. Surrender doesn't mean giving up. It means giving over your resistance, your need to control, your fear of the unknown. There's a difference between clenching your fists and opening your hands. One holds on, the other receives. I don't say this lightly. Letting go can feel like 1,000 small deaths. Letting go of who you thought you'd be, of how someone treated you, of what you were sure was meant to happen. It hurts, but the truth is, we don't actually own anything. Not really. Not the people we love. Not the things we build. Not even our own bodies, which will one day return to the earth. And when we realize that, really feel it, something strange and wonderful happens. We stop taking so much for granted. We begin to savor, to soften, to sit in the fleeting beauty of now. A warm cup of tea, a belly laugh with a friend, the way morning light falls across your floor just so. None of it lasts, and that's exactly what makes it sacred. I've watched lotus flowers bloom at dawn, petals slowly opening to the light, knowing they'll only live for a day or two, and still they open. They don't ask for forever. They bloom anyway. Maybe we can too. Maybe the work isn't to keep life from changing, but to let it change us into something more open, more grounded, more kind. I think about that glass Ajahn Chah held, about the temple the monk bowed to, about the leaf letting go when it was time. And I ask myself, what am I still clinging to? What weight am I dragging behind me? And what would happen if I simply let go? Not to fall apart, but to fall into peace, into trust, into the sacred mystery of what comes next. And maybe, just maybe, that's where real freedom begins. Not in holding on tighter, but in finally loosening your grip and discovering that peace was never about control. It was always about surrender. Peace begins with one breath. I used to believe that peace was something you had to earn. That maybe if I worked hard enough, meditated long enough, was kind enough, I'd eventually arrive at some magical moment where the noise in my mind would fall silent, and I'd feel calm, permanently. But peace isn't a destination. It's a direction. And sometimes, it begins in the smallest of places, like one mindful breath, one pause before reacting, one gentle whisper of awareness in a moment that could have easily become a storm. I didn't learn this from a mountaintop or a monastery. I learned it at a red light, actually, one that just wouldn't turn green. It was hot. I was late. My chest was tight. My jaw was clenched. And I was about to honk when something in me, quietly, without drama, just said, breathe. So I did. And for the first time in a long time, I realized how far I had drifted from myself. That one breath didn't change the traffic light, but it changed me. I think that's what mindfulness really is. Not a grand performance, not some enlightened glow, just remembering to come back. To what? To now. To this moment exactly as it is, with its crooked teeth and dirty dishes, with its beauty and boredom and unexpected grace. Mindfulness, or sati in the Pali language, isn't about emptying the mind. It's about filling it with presence, feeling the way your feet touch the ground, noticing the warmth of a teacup in your hands, hearing the way the wind stirs the leaves like a slow conversation. I once watched an elderly woman peel an orange in silence. The way she moved, so slow, so tender, it was like each segment of the fruit was a sacred offering. That too is mindfulness, an invitation to be fully here, not lost in yesterday or rushing into tomorrow. And from that presence comes a shift, because once we become aware, we start to see with new eyes. We see the impulse to snap at our partner and choose kindness instead. We hear the stress in our own voice and soften it. We notice how often we're distracted and gently come back, over and over. Like training a puppy, really. You don't scold it when it wanders. You just guide it home again. That's how the mind learns. That's how peace is built. Not all at once, but breath by breath. Meditation, then, becomes the space where we practice coming home. It's not always easy. Sometimes the mind is loud. Sometimes it feels like you're just sitting with your own chaos. But that's okay. The purpose of meditation isn't to get rid of thoughts. It's to get to know them, to watch them pass like clouds, to realize you are the sky, and there is always space. One man I know, let's call him Min, used to think he was terrible at meditation. He'd sit for 5 minutes and get overwhelmed. His thoughts would race: work, money, family, the grocery list. He'd get frustrated. He'd quit. But then he heard something that changed his perspective. A monk said to him, "Every time your mind wanders and you notice it, that's a moment of awakening." Min began again. 5 minutes a day. No pressure. No perfection. He just sat, breathed, returned. And over time, something shifted. Not just on the cushion, but in his life. He told me one day, "I still get angry, but now I see it coming." He described it like noticing a storm cloud before it pours. That space between reactivity and response, that's the gold. That's the medicine. That's the power of mindfulness. Creates room inside of us. Room to choose. Room to change. Room to grow. And when that awareness is paired with ethical living, everything deepens. The Buddha didn't just teach meditation. He offered a full path, one that includes how we speak, how we treat others, what we consume, and how we live. The 5 precepts aren't commandments. They're gentle guideposts. Not killing, not stealing, not engaging in sexual misconduct, not lying, not intoxicating the mind. At first glance, they may seem strict, but at their core, they're about integrity. Living in a way that leaves fewer regrets, fewer ripples of harm, more peace inside and out. I once knew a woman named Clara, a single mom working 2 jobs, juggling too many things. She didn't have time for long meditations or retreats, but she made a simple vow: no lies, even small ones. It was harder than she thought, but over time it made her sharper, more aware. It changed how she parented, how she communicated at work. She said, "I didn't just become more honest, I became more free." Another man I know, a CEO in a high-stakes tech company, started practicing mindful listening. He didn't announce it. He just began showing up to meetings with his full attention. No phone, no multitasking, just presence. At first, people were confused. Then they started opening up more. Trust deepened. Conflict decreased. All from listening, truly listening. And then there was Lean, a mother of 3 who had a habit of yelling. She was exhausted, stretched thin. One day, after learning about mindfulness, she tried something new. When her child spilled milk on the floor, instead of yelling, she took a breath. One breath. That breath gave her the pause she needed to respond with patience, not punishment. It wasn't perfect. It didn't happen every time, but it was a beginning. And sometimes, beginnings are everything. That's what this whole path is, really. A series of small beginnings. Each time you bring awareness to the moment, you begin again. Each time you choose compassion over anger, you begin again. Each time you fall down and get back up, you begin again. That's what resilience is made of. Not avoiding the fall, but softening the way we land. Mindfulness helps us land gently. And when you live this way long enough, it starts to spill into everything. How you eat, how you walk, how you wake up and greet the day. Not with a groan, but with curiosity. I remember walking through a temple garden one morning. The air was still cool. Leaves danced softly in the breeze. There was incense floating through the air, barely visible, like memory. I passed an old monk sweeping the path. He smiled at me and said, "We don't sweep to clean the ground. We sweep to clear the mind." That stayed with me, because in our rush to achieve something, we often forget the beauty of simply being with what is. There is nothing too ordinary for mindfulness. washing dishes, folding laundry, feeding the dog. Each act is an altar, each moment an offering. We don't need perfect silence or a meditation cushion to wake up. We just need to remember again and again that this moment is enough. You are enough, right now, as you are. Your mind is your home. Clean it gently, with breath, with awareness, with the intention to meet yourself and others with kindness. And when that feels hard, as it often will, just begin again. Peace isn't far. It begins with your next breath. The heart that holds us all. I used to think that compassion was something you gave to others. Kind word here, a helping hand there. But life has a way of teaching us that compassion isn't just a gift we offer. It's a bridge that connects us all. I remember a time when I felt utterly alone. The world seemed vast and indifferent, and I was just a small, insignificant speck. It was during this period that I stumbled upon a story from the Karmashataka Sutra. It tells of a woman named Kachankala, who, despite her own suffering, found solace in the Buddhist teachings. Her story illuminated the profound impact of compassion, not just in receiving it, but in embodying it. This narrative resonated deeply with me, reminding me that even in our darkest moments, the act of extending compassion can be a beacon of light. In Buddhism, compassion isn't merely an emotion. It's a fundamental aspect of our being. It's the recognition that our suffering and joy are intertwined with that of others. When we cultivate compassion, we're not just alleviating the pain of another, we're healing a part of ourselves. I recall a moment when this understanding became profoundly personal. A dear friend was going through a tumultuous time, and I found myself at a loss for words. Instead of offering platitudes, I simply sat with them, sharing the silence, allowing my presence to be a testament to my empathy. In that shared stillness, I realized that compassion often requires no words, just an open heart. The Buddha's life is replete with acts of boundless compassion. One such instance is when he encountered a monk suffering from illness, neglected by his peers. Without hesitation, the Buddha tended to him, teaching that caring for the sick is akin to caring for him. This story serves as a poignant reminder that true compassion transcends comfort and convenience. It calls us to action, to be present for others in their time of need. In our modern world, where individualism is often celebrated, the concept of Sangha, the Buddhist community, offers a refreshing perspective. A Sangha is more than just a gathering. It's a living embodiment of interconnectedness, a space where individuals come together to practice, support, and uplift one another. Being part of such a community has taught me the invaluable lesson that we are not solitary travelers on this path. Our journeys are intertwined, and in supporting one another, we find strength and resilience. I recall attending a retreat where practitioners from diverse backgrounds came together. Despite our differences, there was an unspoken bond, a shared commitment to growth and understanding. In that space, I felt the true essence of Sangha, a community bound not by similarity, but by a collective aspiration for enlightenment and compassion. Compassion also extends beyond human interactions. There's a tale of Kakurapa, a yogi who formed a deep bond with a stray dog. His unwavering care for the animal led to profound spiritual insights, illustrating that compassion knows no boundaries. This story reminds me of a time when I cared for an injured bird. Nurturing it back to health became a meditation in itself, teaching me patience, empathy, and the profound connection we share with all beings. In cultivating compassion, we also learn the art of forgiveness. There's a powerful story of Angulimala, a feared bandit who transformed his life through the Buddha's guidance. Despite his past misdeeds, he embraced the path of compassion and found redemption. This narrative serves as a testament to the transformative power of compassion, not just towards others, but towards ourselves. We all carry burdens of regret and guilt, but through self-compassion, we can find healing and move forward with a lighter heart. One of the most profound teachings on compassion comes from the story of Kisa-Gautami. After losing her only child, she was consumed by grief and sought the Buddha's help to bring her son back to life. The Buddha instructed her to find a mustard seed from a household that had not experienced death. Her search led her to the realization that death is a universal experience, and through this understanding, she found solace. This story beautifully encapsulates the essence of compassion as a bridge connecting us through shared experiences. In my own life, I've found that moments of deep suffering have been the catalysts for profound compassion. Experiencing loss, failure, or heartache has opened my heart to the pain of others, fostering a genuine desire to alleviate their suffering. It's in these moments that I've come to understand that compassion isn't a passive feeling but an active engagement with the world around us. Incorporating mindfulness into our daily lives enhances our capacity for compassion. By being present, we become attuned to the subtle cues of others' emotions, allowing us to respond with empathy. I recall a time when a colleague was unusually quiet. In the past, I might have overlooked this, but practicing mindfulness allowed me to notice and offer a listening ear. That simple act of presence made a significant difference in their day and deepened our connection. Compassion also plays a pivotal role in ethical living. When we recognize the interconnectedness of all beings, our actions naturally align with the well-being of others. This understanding fosters a sense of responsibility, guiding us to make choices that promote harmony and reduce suffering. I remember grappling with a decision that, while beneficial to me, could have adversely affected others. Reflecting on the principle of compassion led me to choose a path that honored the collective good, bringing a profound sense of peace. In essence, compassion is the heartbeat of the Buddhist path. It's the thread that weaves us together, reminding us that our individual actions ripple out into the world, affecting the collective fabric of existence. By nurturing compassion within ourselves, we contribute to a more harmonious and loving world. As we conclude this journey through the facets of compassion, I invite you to reflect on the ways you can embody this virtue in your own life. Whether through small acts of kindness, active listening, or simply being present, each gesture contributes to a tapestry of compassion that holds us all. Remember, the heart that holds compassion is the heart that holds us all. Beautiful. We'll now continue into the next section with the same gentle, heartfelt rhythm. Here's the rewritten narrative, flowing naturally from the previous part. The wisdom in each step. I used to think wisdom was found in books, pages worn with underlines, scriptures marked with tiny notes in the margins, quotes memorized like spells to be recited when life felt too heavy. But real wisdom, the kind that softens your voice and steadies your breath, it doesn't just live in words. It lives in how you walk through the world. Not just where your feet go, but how gently they touch the earth. I remember walking through a monastery path one rainy morning in Kyoto. The gravel crunched beneath my sandals, and each drop of rain tapped on the leaves like a soft drum. I watched an old monk walking ahead of me. He wasn't in a hurry. He didn't even seem to have a destination. With each step, his body swayed slightly, his breath slow, his hands folded loosely in front of him like he was holding something invisible. Later, over tea, I asked him what he was doing. He smiled and said, "I was walking with everything, and I think that's the heart of it. To live wisely isn't to escape the world. It's to walk with it, with all of it, the joy and the mess, the beauty and the breaking." Wisdom in Buddhism isn't an abstract prize. It's intimate, lived, felt. It's in how you make tea, how you greet a stranger, how you forgive yourself for forgetting, then remember again. One of the greatest teachings I ever received wasn't from a sutra. It was from an 8-year-old child I once taught mindfulness to. Her name was Mai, and during a quiet practice, I noticed she had tears in her eyes. I asked her gently what she was feeling. She looked up at me and whispered, "I just realized, my mom is always tired, but she still makes me soup." That was wisdom, compassionate awareness, the kind that sees beyond the surface. So often, we think awakening means rising above everything. But the Buddha didn't float away from the world. He sat under a tree on the earth. He walked barefoot. He touched the ground with one hand and said, "The earth is my witness. Awakening is not escaping. It's returning. Returning to what is real, what is felt, what is quietly sacred. And the more we return, the more we begin to feel the threads that connect all things." You walk into a room and sense someone's sorrow even if they're smiling. You pass a tree and feel a hush in your chest like it's reminding you to slow down. You touch your own heart and realize you're not as separate as you thought. There's a Zen koan that asks, "What is your original face before your parents were born?" To me, that's another way of asking, who are you beneath all the noise? Before the labels, before the roles, before the striving and the shame and the endless doing. Who is that you? Maybe it's the child who used to stare at the stars, or the quiet presence you feel when sitting beside someone you love in silence. Maybe it's not something to find. Maybe it's something to remember. And when you begin to live from that remembering, your life becomes less about fixing and more about flowing, less about proving and more about presence. There's a monk I met who used to be a lawyer. He told me his life was full of success but empty of meaning. He said the turning point came one night when he was eating dinner alone in his apartment, and suddenly, everything went quiet. No phone, no music, no voices, just the sound of his own chewing. He said he looked down at his food and realized he didn't remember how it got there, who grew it, who picked it, who cooked it. He had been living on the world, but not with it. That night, he decided to change. Not drastically at first. He just started eating slowly, then walking more, then meditating. And eventually, he left his job, sold everything, and became a monk. But the wisdom didn't begin with robes or retreats. It began in the silence between bites. It began with one breath. That's the thing about wisdom. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand. It arrives like the first snow on temple rooftops, quiet, soft, and utterly complete. And when it comes, it brings clarity. Not certainty, but clarity. The kind that helps you know when to speak and when to stay silent, when to walk away and when to stay, when to hold and when to let go. And it brings compassion, too. Because once you've suffered, really suffered, you stop judging so quickly. You stop rushing people through their pain. You learn to sit with them, not to fix, just to witness, to say without words, I see you, and I'm here. That is wisdom. That is love in action. Not flashy, not perfect, just real. So if you're searching for wisdom, don't look too far. It might be in how you fold your clothes, how you cradle a crying child, how you apologize, how you forgive. It might be in how you pause when your anger rises, and instead of lashing out, you take a single breath. Just one. A doorway opens, and through it, a life of deeper peace, a life of presence, a life that is fully, beautifully awake. Maybe the work was never about holding on. Maybe the path is really about learning how to open, like a lotus that blooms in the mud, not in spite of it, but because of it. So if you're standing at the edge of something today, a goodbye, a change, a quiet ache in your chest, remember this: you don't have to force your way through it. You can breathe, you can soften, you can let the moment carry you, just like the leaves trust the wind, just like the moon rises without effort. Now I'd love to hear from you. Is there something you've been learning to let go of? Something that's been teaching you how to surrender? Share it in the comments. Not for attention, but for connection. And if this video gave you even a drop of peace, let it ripple. Subscribe. Stay. Not just for more teachings, but for this quiet little sangha we're building, one breath, one story, one awakening at a time. Until next time, may you be well. May you be free. May you remember you were never walking alone.